Welcome to our Danube Institute event on the US-China trade war and its geopolitical ramifications. A warm welcome to Zhou Yangyang, Second Secretary of the Chinese Embassy, and to Luis Ferreira Alvarez, the Economics Attaché of the American Embassy. We're also honored to have, do we have him at this point? Oh, well, we're honored, of course, to have John and Melissa O'Sullivan here. And we extend our congratulations to all Catholics, including Chinese Catholics, on the election of Pope Leo XIV. And to our American guests, congratulations on having the first American Pope. Before us is a complex and consequential topic, but we're going to approach it boldly. For Hungary, the US-China trade war is of particular relevance. Through its connectivity strategy, Hungary has forged close ties with both the Trump administration in the United States and the People's Republic of China. Oh, and by the way, I'm wearing a Hungarian Attila jacket. It shouldn't be confused with the magua, the Qing-era Chinese garment of the 18th and 19th century. I think Liang Qichao sometimes wore something like this, but that's definitely not it. So I haven't taken sides in the US-China trade war yet. It's the Hungarian outfit. My name is Erik Hendricks. I'm a visiting fellow at the Danube Institute and a China-curious Dutch sociologist. I previously worked at Peking University in Beijing, and today I have the pleasure of serving as your host and moderator. Our keynote speaker is Professor Yan Xuetong, Honorary Dean of the Institute of International Relations at Tsinghua University. He is China's most prominent political scientist and a leading voice in global discussions on international affairs, Chinese political thought, and humane authority. The last time Professor Yan spoke at Danube was in April last year, and I think it's fair to say that the world has changed quite a bit, and especially American politics, of course. Joining us as respondent is Nathan Levine, one of my generation's most compelling essayists, and a visiting fellow at Danube Institute from the United States. He is the author of the influential Substack, The Upheaval, which explores the ideological revolution consuming the West and the rise of China. Before we begin, allow me a word on the context of this discussion. The Danube Institute is a Hungarian conservative think tank committed to the flourishing of the Hungarian nation. We serve as a platform where a broad range of perspectives meet and where ideas from Anglo-American, Anglosphere conservatism are engaged with, translated and updated for Central European intellectual life. Our role as a bridge to Anglosphere conservatism does not mean we institutionally or dogmatically endorse Trump's tariff policies. In fact, the Anglosphere conservatism is itself deeply divided on the recent turn to protectionism. Many conservatives have expressed solidarity with Canada and Australia, countries significantly affected by the tariffs. Canada in particular has felt the brunt. To show support, His Majesty King Charles, King of Britain and King of Canada, will address the Canadian people from the Canadian throne later this month, marking the first time a monarch has done so since 1977. His Majesty, a figure of unimpeccable conservative standing, reminds us that conservatives are found on both sides of this debate, and in the middle and anywhere else. Even within American conservatism, there is doubt. My friend and colleague Rod Dreher, who supports the Trump, and who showed his film here yesterday, by the way, who supports the Trump administration conditionally and is a personal friend of Vice President J.D. Vance, expressed frustration in a tweet in March. He wrote, "Could somebody please explain to me why Trump is pursuing this trade war, especially with Canada, one of our closest allies?" End of quote. I share this to emphasize that our discussion today is guided not by ideological certainties and foredrawn conclusions, but by a genuine desire to understand the deeper logic of the US-China trade war. The trade war appears both erratic and strangely patterned. On one level, it seems propelled by events. When in February Trump announced a 10% fentanyl tariff, as he called it, despite earlier Chinese cooperation with the Biden administration to curb fentanyl flows, this angered Beijing, which then stood ready, so Beijing stood ready to reply with countermeasures when Trump introduced a sweeping additional 34% tariff on all Chinese goods in early April. Simultaneously, the US lowered the tariffs on most other major economies, so those are tariffs that it had just imposed in early April, to 10%. A gesture meant to counterbalance the escalation of the US-China trade war and to stabilize the US sovereign debt market. As of now, the US and China are imposing general tariffs of 145% and 125% on each other's goods, respectively. Yet both sides have, to protect themselves, carved out exemptions for certain categories of goods. And these exemptions on both sides cover roughly 20% of the original trade volume. At the same time, there seems to be a deeper logic. Though how precisely macroeconomics and geopolitics are entangled is complex and perhaps ambivalent. Frustrated by its chronic trade deficit and the accompanying erosion of its industrial and industrial military base, the Trump, and here's the link to security, right, with the military base, military-industrial complex. The Trump administration seeks to overhaul America's role in the global economic order. This effort takes the form of tariffs and economic pressure campaigns targeting net exporting nations. Yet while the measures affect allies like Japan and South Korea, China, Washington's chief strategic competitor, is most heavily targeted. So how should we understand this? Is Trump's trade war primarily a geopolitical strategy to reindustrialize America and rebuild the embedding of its military-industrial complex? Or is it best seen as a revolutionary macroeconomics? A macroeconomic intervention with geopolitical consequences that are largely incidental and even detrimental to America's alliance systems. In a recent episode of Danube's Economics podcast, and we have various podcasts which you can find on our website, our in-house macroeconomist Philip Pilkington made the latter argument. He argued that the trade war is above all part of a revolutionary attempt to restructure the American and global macroeconomic order, and that America has for now set aside its earlier geopolitical concerns. He even spoke of it being, the trade war as being an anti-geopolitics. But I know that opinions differ on this matter. Will traditional US allies like South Korea and Japan pivot closer to China? In an interview with the Hungarian Conservative, one of Danube's partner magazines, Ambassador Gong Tao of China, and I'm not sure what the tones are here, Gong Tao, of China remarked that, quote, US tariffs have catalyzed the formation of new trade blocs and accelerated regional integration, a trend highlighted by recent high-level talks between China, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, the first in 5 years. End of quote. In fact, just last week, ASEAN countries, the 10 members of ASEAN in Southeast Asia, joined China, South Korea, and Japan in Milan, Italy, to jointly affirm their commitment to free trade. So what exactly is the US-China trade war? How is it reshaping international relations in the Pacific and East Asia? And what deeper forces, macroeconomic, political, or ideological, are at play here? To explore these questions, we begin with a lecture from Professor Yan, followed by Nathan's response and a panel discussion. We'll then open the floor to your questions. Please join me in welcoming Professor Yan.
Thank you, Eric. And I highly appreciate Daniel provide this opportunity for me and to share my view about the current conflicts between China and the US. And I remember last year when I came to the same place and I talked about the counter-globalization. Actually, at that time, not everyone feel the trend of a counter-globalization that much. I think this year, people really feel that globalization can no longer continue, right? And actually in China, and some people do not agree with me. They say, no, this is not a American policy towards China is not a deglobalization, and it is the Chinanization. That means that U.S. try to delete China from the globalization, exclude China from globalization. And now this kind of argument vanish, disappear. And they found that this is a counter-globalization is a universal event, a trend. It's not only bilateral problem between China and the U.S. Well, and today we're talking about the trade war between China and the U.S. Actually, I will say this is not a bilateral issue. This really has a strong global impact. It's shaping a new global order. And during the Cold War, we have a Cold War order, and mainly carried out by these proxy wars between Soviet Union and the U.S. After the Cold War, U.S. became the only superpower, and then U.S. initiated the globalization. Globalization composed by two parts. Economic side is known as the marketization. That means united the whole world and into one market, because before 1991 the whole world economy is so segmented. Every country, not every, a major economy has their market and do not open to the world. So then the marketization in the 1990s and successfully transferred the 关贸总协定, and I suddenly escaped the term from me. A gap. Thank you very much. Transfer the gap to the WTO. That means develop the united trade norms for the whole world, right? That is called the marketization. But then on the political side, it's a democratization. We know that actually they developed a lot of labor norms and for the global events or the international behavior. And at that time, we know that we gave the first priority to human rights. So in some people said that the norm of human rights overwhelmed the norm of the sovereignty. So this is what happened in the 25 years and after the Cold War. Then from the 2017, when the UK withdrew from the EU, actually very few people give attention about its global influence. They regarded that's a European problem, had nothing with the rest of the world. Oh, that's true, because the UK is not a big country, it's a middle power. So that's why it's the impact only for this region, not the whole world. But then the nature or the character of that policy is a deglobalization. It's not a regional issue. It's not only withdraw from a regional economic cooperation. Actually, UK adopted the deglobalization policy. That means reduce international cooperation with the rest of the world. Well, these things do not get people's enough attention to realize that counter-globalization is coming. But then, very soon, when the Trump 1.0 initiated the trade war against China, and this two big economy, and have the trade conflicts, it has a global impact on almost everyone. Now people feel, hey, this is a problem. I mean, the trade war between China and the US is going to reshape global economic order. Today, many people still believe the trade war between China and the U.S. only shape the economic order rather than political order or secure order. My understanding, and that could be wrong. This is we're not only to see the change in economic order, but also in security and political order, like that. Okay, then now when the war took place in Ukraine in 2022, and the people have a strong sense of developed a strong sense of economic security. I think many people remember that. EU initiated several documents and for the economic security. What do I mean economic security? And no one has a clear definition for it. No one knows what it means economic security. But then this concept legitimized the EU and all of the major economies' policy to reduce or cut off economic cooperation. Today, Trump's administration used the same concept, economic security, protect the Americans' job, protect the American market, everything for American economic security. Then what? It means reduce and cut off economic cooperation. That's it. So even Trump himself admitted that 145% tariff on Chinese products means no trade, totally decoupling the economy. Well, my understanding, this is not only economic decoupling. And a lot of people believe, and in China at least, I don't know how about here, but in China, many people believe the EU changed the attitude toward China because Trump initiated the tariff, 20% tariff on EU. Actually, that's not true. Yeah, I think this gentleman will agree with me. EU changed the attitude is not because of the tariff. That's my view. Because what? Trump's policy toward the war in Ukraine. When Trump said that he no longer wants to support Ukraine, changed the U.S. policy toward Russia, and the EU immediately reconsidering the strategic relationship with China. Before Trump talking about 20% tariff on EU. And so you see, these two things are closely related to each other. It's not a pure economic issue. So the trade war between China and U.S., from my understanding, is a comprehensive thing. It's a shape of the global order in all fields, not only the trade. Okay, then what happened? Not only EU reconsidering the relationship with China, but also, I don't know whether we have Japanese participants, and Japan also realized that. I think Japan realized this change earlier than EU. EU changed the policy toward China after Trump and inauguration take over the power in the White House. Japan changed last year. And in middle of last year, and the Japanese ambassador and contacted with me. We had a very nice conversation. We talked about the possibility to improve bilateral relationship between China and Japan. At that time, no one knows who will win. But Japan has already prepared the domestic change in the U.S. I don't know whether any of you know that a term. That's really what the Japanese worried. In Chinese, 越顶外交, diplomacy overhead. They remember in 1970s when Nixon and developed a strategic relationship with China directly without consultation with Japan. They said, wait a minute. And they don't want that kind of thing happen to Japan. And Japan said we should make the step first. So before the election, general election in the U.S. had a result, Japanese government already initiated contact with the Chinese government and coincidentally, I'm in charge of the World Peace Forum in Beijing, and then what? And then we talked about the possibility to have a Japanese ambassador to participate in the World Peace Forum. And we cannot get Japanese participants to World Peace Forum for 5 years. Last year, we not only get a Japanese ambassador to the forum, and the Japanese embassy also help us to get some Japanese scholars to join the discussion. I think this year we are going to have more Japanese participants. Just 4 months after the World Peace Forum held in July, Chinese and Japanese prime minister had a meeting. Chinese and the Japanese prime minister have not had a meeting together for many years. And then that is all of these things before the election turned out, knows who wins. Japan has already prepared that. I think that they are very sensitive. They know if America changes the type of leadership, the relationship between China and the U.S. and will change. And also the relationship between Japan and the U.S. may change. And this kind of change is not bilateral, could be a universal. So I think the Europeans realized they changed very late. Only after Trump won the election, and Europeans still do not want to change the policies toward China, but then they resisted until Trump said, no, I don't think the Russia is wrong, and that's not Russia's own problem. Then Europeans, wait a minute, right? The turning point is Murica Security Conference when J.D. Vance said, hey, you Europeans, we do not have a shared value. Then they realized that. Japanese and South Koreans, they changed this much early. And now, I don't know, perhaps the people in this region didn't know we have the trilateral meeting between China, Japan, and South Korea. Just now, Eric said that we started talking about free trade, right? So you see, this free trade has stopped negotiated among the 3 countries for 6 years. Now we resumed the dialogue, negotiation about to establish a free trade zone among these 3 countries. So that is the first argument. I mean, the trade war between China and the U.S. is not a bilateral issue. It's an indicator of the global issue, right? Second, and the trade war between China and the U.S. actually, and many people people only do the compare about the capability, how much U.S. can win based on Americans' technology and this purchasing capability, right? America have the right to print U.S. dollars. They can use a piece of paper to purchase everything. And how much China's products China can produce based on its manufacturing industry. Well, capability do has a strong impact on this issue. But actually, there's another thing. This what? It's a mentality about this problem. That means for China and the U.S., now, both sides, the 2 sides have different view about this. It's not only competition who is going to win. There's a different view about what kind of a global order we want to have. The order is based on rule. That's the American term, rule-based order, right? And by the Biden administration. And there's a big debate between Chinese government and Biden administration. China said, wait a minute. When you tell me you want to have an order based on rule, I want to know what the rules they are. But then they don't tell us. They said based on rules, but we don't know what rules they are. But then they said universal rules. I said, okay, so what's the concrete? The universal, how universal? What is concrete? They said they don't know. And now the situation is different. It's not debate what rules we should have for as a base for the order. Now the difference is that the order should be based on rules or based on deals between leaders. My understanding, and Trump administration said, no, this is wrong. The order should not be based on rules. The order should be based on the deals between the leaders. I do not want to say which one is right. Maybe in the history, if you recall the history for a very long time, the international order was based on the deals between leaders, especially when there are not many republicans, when there are many monarchies, empires, and knights. Why? Because at that period, in the history, the state is not owned by people. The state is owned by rulers. So that's, for human beings, for 1,000 years, the order is based on deals between leaders. That's a fact. The question is that, and when America initiated the globalization after the Cold War in 1991, actually a whole different view from liberalism. Liberals believe the order is established after World War II. Well, I don't think so, because actually during the Cold War, the Soviet Union and hold a very different view from the U.S. about the way how to maintain the global order. But only after Cold War. And then the world, not everyone, but the majority of the states agree with that, and we need some rules, shared rules for maintaining the order. So today, my understanding, the war between China, the trade war between China and the U.S. is about what type of order we should establish or shape. This is a different view. And from my understanding, for EU, they continue to use the term of order based on rules, and they reach agreement with China on this principle. But I don't think China and the EU have reached agreement on what rules we should use. They reach agreement on principle, but come to the concrete rules, and they may not agree with each other. So I think this is a big issue. Why is a big issue? Because this decided the type of the order we are going to have. And if we're talking about the order, we have a different type of orders. For instance, university, this is a type of order. And the military camp, this is a type of order. Prison is another type of order. They all have orders, but different types of order. Now, from my understanding, the world now is facing this problem. What kind of order we are going to have? Here, I do not want to argue which type of order is good, what is kind of order is bad. That's not what I want to argue today. I mean that we need to realize that by now we do not have a shared view what type of order we should establish. Right? If we do not, if somehow they want to have some country want order A, the other want order B, and you can never have a united order. That's impossible. So when we have two orders, and there's a possibly order within small groups, more conflicts between different countries and between the two orders, right? Okay. When I say that it's possible the world will divide it in two, that means actually I want to say because I have argued for this for a long time, I think the world is moving in the direction bipolarization rather than multipolarization. So I mean that now if we have the two orders, what kind of two orders they will be? And it's not myself, and even the UN Secretary General and Guterres, he said that the world may have two markets. For instance, now there's a competition between DeepSeek and ChatGPT. And this is not only the competition for technology, it's a competition for standards of technology. And so, at least one is keep the principle, closed source. The other keep the principle, open source. We should develop AI based on the principle, according to the principle, open source or closed source. There's two different ideas, different philosophies, different mentalities. Someone believe closed source is secure. Some believe open source is secure. So you see, even come to a very specific issue, the world may divide it in two. So here, I think I have talked too much, right?
Please go on.
Another 5 minutes?
Take it.
Okay. Okay, another 5 minutes. So my argument that this type of order, and it's not what we're familiar with during the Cold War. Now that too many people said that, oh, China-U.S. Trade war and will turn the world back into a new Cold War. I don't think we're going to back to a new Cold War. This is a different order, different from the Cold War, different from the liberal order after Cold War, and it's a bipolar, but it doesn't mean based on two camps, based on two countries. Most countries will take a side between China and the U.S. according to specific issues. On issue A, the state, okay, let's take Hungary, for example. On issue A, Hungary may side with China. On issue B, and Hungary may issue with the U.S. And many countries will do this. Who initiated this strategy? Singapore. In 2010, and Singapore initiated the strategy known as a hedging strategy, and economically side with China. In terms of security, side with the U.S., so maintain the balance of the power. My understanding that maybe every country are very different. Every country's hedging strategy is very different. But no matter big or small, and I think in next decade, most countries face this situation. They have to decide to side with one of these two great powers. So then what will happen? Competition is a normal phenomenon for human history for 1,000 years. And the competition between the major powers for 1,000 years never stop. It will continue for another 1,000, maybe 4,000 years. The question is how to compete with each other. We can compete through war. We can compete peacefully. So from my understanding, the trade war between China and the U.S. is much better than hard war between China and the U.S. It's much better than proxy war between China and the U.S. And it's even better than any military clashes between China and the U.S. Why? Because trade war at least is a peaceful competition. It's not the traditional military it's not a military violation. So in that way, my understanding at this moment, it's not time to talking about what China and the U.S. can cooperate with each other. Actually, that is a critical time for both sides talking about how to manage the competition between us. Can we compete in civilized manner? Can we compete peacefully? Can we compete through the competition, make the whole world benefit from our competition? And if the whole world benefit from the competition, China and the U.S. make contribution for the world. And if our competition make everyone suffer, and that means we bring disaster to everyone. So I don't think the competition is a problem. The problem is how to compete against each other, in what way. And the positive thing is that, I think everyone knows that, either tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, Chinese Vice Prime Minister and U.S. Financier, right? And they are going to meet in the Swiss and talking about the trade problem between China and U.S. No one expected they can reach agreement. Neither of the two governments prepared to get some agreements. But they think this is necessary. Even there's no solution, even they cannot reach anything, even they have nothing to sign, it's better than no negotiation. It's better than no talk. So my understanding that no matter what happened, as long as China and the U.S. prefer to deal with the problems between them through diplomacy, that's something positive. And not, as long as they do not looking for the mental solution, I think that's the best thing. Okay, finally, I think I'm going to wrap up that. And first, we should not, definitely, we don't think the trade war between China and the U.S. is a positive thing. But then we have to talk about how to manage this trade war between China and the U.S. And for the other countries, have to concern how the other countries deal with this. The reason is that if the world do not learn from the lesson from the trade war between China and the U.S., that's my view. There will be more trade wars between different countries. Why? One reason. Global overproductivity. We have moved into the age. Marx once said, there's enough supply for human being. And now human being, too powerful, too capable, produce too many things, which human being cannot consume all of them. We overproduce cars, produce a TV size, or produce the airplanes, produce missiles, produce socks, clothes, food, grain, wine, everything. Human being has a problem. It's not a lack of things to consume. It's that we have no capability to consume what we produced. Every country faces a problem, even very tiny country, and they face a problem. For instance, for Singapore, very small. And Singapore provides overproductive financial service. The world no longer needs that much financial service, whether Singapore, Tokyo, Shanghai, and New York, and the London, and Frankfurt. So many cities provide financial service. Human beings do not need that, man. We cannot consume of them, okay? And actually from movies, series, games, electric games, many service. Not only material things we cannot products we cannot consume, and even the service and overproduced. We cannot. How can we do? The traditional method to dealing with the overproductivity is that block your border, let your own citizens consume what you produced. And when they cannot produce all of the things you produce, you try to export them, let the foreigners to consume the overproduced products. This is a problem. When every country wants to do the same, when every country adopt the same strategy, how can we do? It's inevitably the protectionism will prevail all over the world. Every economy will protect their domestic market. And then what? They will reduce international cooperation. So here, my understanding that now the whole world have to learn from the lesson of the trade war between China and the U.S. concern. How can we maintain the balance between production and consumption at a global size? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yan, for this grand overview of the issue. Professor Yan has offered a contextualization of the trade war as macroeconomically in terms of international relations, in terms of thinking about world order itself. It would be an understatement and a mischaracterization to say that the world order is changing, because that world order would be expressed in the singular. There's not one world order. There's a constellation, a changing constellation with different views of what order means within that constellation. And so, in fact, what it means for the world to be ordered is itself something that is being competed over. I think that your depiction of us being in a sweeping transformation that includes politics and macroeconomics would probably fit well with what Nathan is going to talk about, because his Substack is called The Upheaval. So we are in a great upheaval. So we'll see where we find commonalities, and we're interested in Nathan's response. Nathan, please take the stage, and give a round of applause to Nathan.
Well, thank you, Professor Yan, for a very broad overview of this. I think there's so much there for me to respond to that I can't do all of it. So I'll give some of my thoughts. Eric, I do think that we're in a time of upheaval, as Professor Yan also talked about. I think that Trump, people often, I think, mistake Trump too much as an agent of change, that is this character who's come forward to really radically revolutionize or change the world or change America. Whereas I see Trump as almost this figure who is riding a wave that is happening in the world and is almost a condensed symbol of the trend of the times, as they like to say in China, that is already happening. I think we saw that with Brexit, as was mentioned, that this change towards counter-globalization, which I agree is happening, was already happening before Trump. Trump has only maybe accelerated these changes that are already happening in the world for much bigger reasons than just decisions Trump has made himself. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And in this context, I don't think, Eric, that there can be any strict separation between geopolitics and macroeconomics or any of this that we're talking about, because I think the changes we are seeing are the product of trends and considerations that do not make any solid separation between those things. So I think counter-globalization, why are we seeing counter-globalization? Which I agree is happening. Because the conditions that made globalization possible, which was the Pax Americana created by the certain stability of the Cold War period, and then the unipolar moment of America after the Cold War, that this period that enabled hyperglobalization is coming to an end. And it's been coming to an end for a long time before Trump, but now it's really in a phase of its decline. I think we've seen that, for example, in a recognition of that in, say, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who said this unipolar moment is coming to an end. We're entering a multipolar period, which is the norm in history. And this is what America is preparing for. So I think there's multiple things there that should be considered. One is that one is to consider what America thinks it must do in a more multipolar period, which is occurring, keep in mind, because American hyperpower is declining. So, for instance, when J.D. Vance goes to Europe and says that we want a stronger Europe that is more based on national sovereignty, I think that was misinterpreted perhaps in Europe often as saying we have fundamental conflicts of values and we are very hostile to Europe. But in fact, America's message to Europe was we want Europe to be stronger and more independent. We want, in fact, a Europe of European strategic autonomy to be a reality. And the reason the United States was saying that to Europe was because the United States wants a stronger Europe, because the United States no longer believes or figures that it is in its interest to protect Europe itself, because it has other things to worry about in a more multipolar system. And the trade war with China, I think, should be seen in that context, and in the context of what we might call the deep concern in the United States over how the system, the macroeconomic system, as you call it, Eric, which is a global system, affects American capacity to perform in a multipolar world. Because as the Trump administration has laid out at various speeches and so on, they believe that the system in which the United States is the world reserve currency and a permanent deficit, has a permanent trade deficit with the rest of the world, structurally forces the United States to deindustrialize. And that is a huge problem because I think the United States really does see that in this multipolar system, it is in a, not destined for war with China, of course, but in a strategic competition with China, in which it is very increasingly important that the United States have a solid defense industrial base, in general industrial base, as you say, Eric, that this is necessary to compete not only with China, but in a more realistic fashion in this harder, less peaceful world. And what we've seen in, say, the war in Ukraine is that from the war in Ukraine, is that, for example, currently Russia, which is 4% of GDP, global GDP, is outproducing the United States and Europe combined in the production of artillery shells by about, if I have the figures right, about 1.6 million to 1.3 million per year. So what that has revealed to the United States is that there is very serious problems with their industrial capacity, and that industrial capacity is, as many people seem to have forgotten in this long period of peace, is fundamental to national power. And I think, ironically, the United States has, under the Trump administration, but even before then, had started to come to this idea, that perhaps the Chinese had a better idea of national power when Xi Jinping said it's critical that China pay attention to the real economy as opposed to the fictitious economy, that China must never deindustrialize. I think many in Washington would agree that that is the right strategy, and that it's necessary for the United States to pursue its own interests in terms of manufacturing and many other issues, and that it is no longer in the United States' interest to pursue a global economic order for the sake of a global economic order, that they must put the national interest first. It's America first. And so I think that there is a willingness in Washington to see a change, fundamental change in the global order. And that's what putting America first means. It means putting the national interest first. But just as an aside, I think that there is perhaps some opportunity there for more stable relations rather than less stable relations with other countries. I mean, countries like China have long said that they would prefer a more multipolar order that was based on national sovereignty, national determination, and non-interference. And I think that is similar to what the Trump administration now also wants to pursue, which is a global international order based on national sovereignty. So we'll see what can come out of that. The final thing I'd say is that the reason geopolitics and macroeconomics can't be disentangled is also because I see the U.S.-China trade war is, I think, a very basic example of what is essentially a prisoner's dilemma problem at a game theory level of international politics, or international geoeconomics, which is the same thing, which is that if every country in the world pursues free trade, they'll all benefit. And then it's easy to say that you will pursue free trade. If every country in the world pursues a mercantilist, protectionist policy, they'll all suffer. But anyone who tries to pursue free trade in that environment will suffer even more. So everyone stays mercantilist. But if everyone pursues free trade, but one or two actors pursue a mercantilist policy, the mercantilists will do better than everyone else. They'll win. But the free traders will still win more than if everyone was mercantilist, so they have an incentive for a long time to just ride out this situation in which some players are winning more than others. But I think that situation has now become untenable for the United States, which at least sees itself as a free trade power that has been taken advantage of by mercantilist powers, and is now willing to make the switch to mercantilism. And whether the world can return to a more free trade order, or we all descend into this mercantilist system, I think is what we are going to find out. But the status quo is no longer tenable for Washington because of this geopolitical competition that it finds itself in with China and others. So I think we are indeed heading towards a period of upheaval in the global order, and we don't know where it's going to head, but it is a time of great change.
So I think it's fair to say that, well, both of these statements are very powerful and in many ways compatible and overlapping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to poke around a little bit and find out where some of your differences in interpretation may lie. And also, when it comes to the perspectives you offered here and the perspectives that are offered by other people who've been trying to make sense of this macroeconomic, macro, geopolitical, geoeconomic, holistic transformation in our political world. People such as Ray Dalio, the financial theorist, financial guru, fund manager, who has been writing about the structural trade deficit of the United States and how this became untenable and is now breaking up in a certain particular way. We also have our own in-house Danube Institute macroeconomist, Philip Pilkington. I mentioned him here earlier. He was talking about the unraveling of the American empire and the American empire being overstretched and no longer seeing its ally system as beneficial to its core interests. We're seeing with the America. So I think it's fair to say, first of all, that we have right now we have a lot of people chasing events and looking at incidents, and they're looking at the trees, but they're not seeing the forest. And then there are a few particularly intellectually minded people particularly savvy, that actually see that there's something bigger going on and have a sense of the holism of the events. And I think the two people we have here on stage are among that small class of people who actually manage to see the bigger picture here. But let's find if we can get to some differences here. Professor Yen, Nathan sketched a scenario. In his timeline, we first had a Pax Americana, where it was America that carried globalization, and now we're going towards deglobalization. So first, do you agree with that, or would you say no? Actually, the globalization that we had after the Cold War was actually not specifically carried by America, but by the specific interaction that America had with other major powers such as China. And then I want to turn to the trade deficit. Nathan really stressed the security implications of the trade deficit. If you have a trade deficit, the United States has a trade deficit in goods, not in services with the EU, but with goods it has a trade deficit with China. And the dollar is the dominant reserve currency. And America runs structural budget deficits. If you add all of that up, what you get is a financializing American economy, an economy that is going to be fairly expensive. the dollar is high, so the dollar doesn't depreciate because it's too dominant. Too many people outside the US are trading with dollars, so the dollar doesn't depreciate. If the dollar doesn't depreciate, the exporting sector becomes too expensive, so you deindustrialize in certain sectors. At the same time, Wall Street will flourish because money can flow easily into the American system. So that's what you call a financialization of the economy. So this trade deficit and the budget deficit and the financialization of the American economy and the deindustrialization all hang together, and that all of that in turn has security implications, as Nathan indicated, because a military in a modernity, your military is only powerful if it's embedded in a strong military-industrial complex. But if you just have a munition factory, let's say, that's not enough. A war machine needs all kinds of things. So for America to preserve its military power, it needs a very broad industrial landscape, the kind of thing China has. So there is also a sense, so that's my second question to you, Professor Yen. Would you agree that America is making these moves also because it was forced to choose between deindustrialization and a loss of their military power on the one hand, or a targeted upheaval of the economic system with an economic trade with China in some form? Do you agree with that? And so my first question was, what about the Pax Americana? Was it truly the foundation of the global order, or was the global order in fact something more multifaceted?
Well, after the Cold War, U.S. became the only superpower and gaining the global dominance. So at that time, and policymakers in the U.S. never worry about being catch up by others. They think that they can maintain that kind of a leading position easily, and that leading position will be consolidated by the gap, the power gap between U.S. and the rest of the world. Actually, I think that kind of judgment, at least in 1990s, is absolutely right. In the first 10 years of this century, it's partially right. But now, after 2010, it's not that correct. Why it's absolutely right in 1990s? It's absolutely true. And in 1990s, U.S. GDP, the gap between the U.S. and the other major powers, the gap is increasing, including all of the major powers. And by the first 10 years of this, this century, and U.S. still keeps enlarge the economic gap with the rest of the world, but not China. China is the only exception. But then still the gap is huge. So I think that judgment is right. Then when China became the second largest economy in 2010, this kind of a judgment is only 40% right, because the U.S. continued to enlarge the power gap with the rest of the world, but not China. China then quickly to narrow the power gap with the United States. So that's why, and there's a debate about whether U.S. is decline or not, and why, personally, I use the term relative decline. Because except China, U.S., there's nothing indicating U.S. decline. U.S. increased the power gap with the rest of the world in economy, technology, culture, and the business, everything. China only is one country, and the U.S. comprehensive power, and becomes less and less more advanced than China. So that's why I think this only relative to China, you cannot say U.S. is rising power. In the next, we cannot make the too long prediction, but in next 4 years, I think personally I have confidence. The power gap between China will narrow, and meanwhile, because the Trump's administration's policy may not continue, the U.S. power growing fast enough to keep the gap enlarged and with the other countries. So next 4 years, I think this kind of a view may change fundamentally. The second question, I think you ask about what kind of I forgot, the question escaped from me.
Well, so I wanted to know if you agree with the assessment. So I wanted to, the two questions I had was, first of all, are we moving from Pax Americana globalization? To a yes.
Okay, there's a debate, at least in China. Someone said that, okay, now if U.S. do not participate in the globalization, we are going to have a kind of a new globalization without the United States. I don't think it will happen. And if U.S. do not participate in the globalization, you cannot have globalization without a quarter of the world and away from this trend. Second, and not only U.S. do not continue the globalization, and then the retaliation from the other country to the U.S. foreign policy, my understanding, also affiliated with the deglobalization. So that's a mutual learning between the major powers. The mutual retaliation, the mutual sanctions make the globalization cannot move nowhere. So that's why I'm a little bit pessimistic about the globalization in the next few years.
I haven't though been able to find any real differences of opinion between your two analyses yet. But may I press you then on this point, Professor Yen? You say that we're moving to a bipolarity, and I was wondering if you would agree with that, Nathan, and bipolarity, because usually the phrase is multipolarity. The Chinese politicians use the phrase multipolarity. I'm for myself from a small country, from Gelaan, from the Netherlands, right? So, on behalf of all small countries in the world, yes, we're small, but can we really not form some other poles? Is it only China and the U.S.? Because you were saying that the people are getting worried in Japan and in South Korea and in Europe, but specifically in Japan and South Korea, where they had hedged. They played the following hedging game, where they had their primary economic partner was China, but their security partner was the U.S. They got very worried. They're very worried about the developments in American politics. And in fact, you do see signs, as you mentioned, of the American alliance systems unraveling, specifically in East Asia, but from a new interpretation of self-interest, of American self-interest. What is the national interest of the United States? In America's first picture, this is not a loss, because this was kind of an overstretched element, maybe. But so then, for Korea, it's true. Maybe South Korea will go into the Chinese sphere of influence instead of a sort of shared American-Chinese influence overlap, instead of being in the intersection of overlapping American and Chinese spheres of influence. But for many other countries in the world, Indonesia, Malaysia, Europe, maybe we just reject the having to choose, and we'll say no. We have our own. We're doing our own things. We reject. We're going to talk to the Americans and to the Chinese. Hungary is trying to talk to both sides. Can we not keep doing that?
Okay, and I think two questions. The first is how can we judge the current international configuration? What reference we should use to measure the poles? How many poles we have? So my personal understanding, when we're talking about the configuration and talking about how many poles we have, is mainly refers to the material capability, right? And when we refer to the multilateral capability, now you refer to economic capability or military capability or comprehensive capability. That's my view. I would prefer to use a comprehensive capability, also so-called national comprehensive power. And the reason is that if you use a single capability to measure this world, and people will say, okay, and always use a EU, right? They regard EU as a big economic power, so EU definitely is a pole, and China China, the US, and the EU, at least we have three. If we have Japan, we have India, we have Russia, we have the Brazil, we have many poles. The question is that, what is the quantitative reference for the pole? How about Vietnam? How about South Korea? And where we should stop? Why Cambodia should not be regarded as a pole? They have their independent economy. So at least you have a quantitative measurement, quantitative standard, right? And so my understanding, now if you calculate this power and only at the economic aspect, China, EU, and the US have the more than 10 trillion economy. The other countries are all below 10 trillion, right? No, 1 trillion. 10 trillion.
Well, except the EU is, of course,
EU is
roughly at 20
trillion.
Yeah.
US is 30 trillion. China is roughly 19 trillion, right? So the other countries are all below 10 trillion, right? So now you can see three. How about military? And then say, okay. Now when we come to military, we're talking about Russia. Because the Russian economy is too small, you cannot say they have the economic pole and say military pole. How about the EU? Do EU have that kind of military strength? And so EU can say, okay, we are not an economic pole, but not a military pole. And so everyone can see, and because we don't have the standard common reference, quantitative reference for measure the poles, so we call it a multipolar. So for me, I use a comprehensive national power. I think there's only two countries, China and the US. And then one case is very, very interesting. When EU said that, okay, we are economic entity, economic pole, then the question, can EU make decision for all of the members? Can EU make a decision for Holland to sell the chips to any country or not? And whether SMM sell the chips decided by US or by their government or by the EU. So if the EU do not have the power to decide whether their company can sell the goods to some country, how can you regard it as a pole? And US government, Chinese government, the US said, okay, this company, you cannot sell chips to China. Well, no company dare to. When China said, okay, now stop sell the rare mineral to the US, no company dare to. In EU, do the EU have the power to say, no, you cannot sell? No. So when we do calculate the poles of the international configuration, for me, I think we need a common quantitative reference. And that is one thing. And second, I will say I fully agree with you the fact Chinese government strongly advocate multipolarization. But the Chinese government strongly advocating multipolarization. I never heard Chinese government say, now we are in a world with the multipolars. They said, we hope to live in the world with the multipolars. And also many people, it's a multipolarization. Rization means moving towards. It doesn't mean already, right? So I think now we have to make the distinction. One is what the current international configuration is. Second, what's the direction the international configuration and transferring toward.
I think it's time to turn to the audience. And please ask your Dr. Chen here at the front. Please wait for the microphone. There's a microphone coming in. Dr. Chen of the, sorry, please, first to Dr. Chen. After you will go, Dr. Chen of the China Institute, CEE Institute here in Budapest.
Thank you, Eric. My name is Huifang Tian from China CEE Institute. This is an institute established by CAS in Budapest. So I really very happy to see Professor Yan here, and welcome to Hungary. Actually, I have two questions for our two distinguished speakers. The first question is related to the Trump's trade war in this month. I'm from his Labor Day, actually, till now, it's almost 1 month. In this 1 month, we also lots of back and forth, and also see lots of changes in Trump's reciprocal tariff. So my question is Trump's policy is planned or targeted, or it's just arbitrarily set up? So from your two observation, since it's also very confused for us. It seems unpredictable, but Trump said it's an art of deals. But it's critically criticized by economists. It's illogically, and it's no economic sense. So it's confused. I would like to see the arguments from all of you. The second question may be quite related to the arguments by Professor Yan. We know this is, I fully agree that the long-term trend of US and China decoupling is irrevocable. But in this process, Professor Yang also said this is a process of reshaping global order. So how to, maybe not how to evaluate the EU's role, maybe from the US side or Trump's side, how Trump evaluates the role of EU, since we know he in this period also raised some astonishing arguments like Canada as the first state, or Greenland issue, or any others. So is this arbitrary argument or by Trump, or he has any other targets on including EU? Thank you.
Nathan, do you want to take the first question about the motives of the Trump administration? Because it seems erratic at the surface level. Even if you agree that there may be some deeper logic at play, there's also a kind of random element in how these tariffs have unfolded in the last 2 months.
Yeah, well, I think there's both elements there. I mean, Trump always does sort of a similar thing where he makes some very extreme demands at first, and then walks it back to make a deal. I mean, that's what the art of the deal thing is about, and I think that is present in his decision-making, that he wants to make deals with countries like the UK, for instance. They just, had a little deal. I think that is part of it. I think the global nature of the tariffs, though, there is a structural purpose to that, this macroeconomic purpose, to try to change the structure of the American economy. That's also there. And I think that some of the tension might be between these two approaches in the administration, might be that the administration is not just Trump. There's many different people in there of different perspectives. And I think some are more focused on reordering the American economy, and some are more focused on making deals and changing the geopolitical level, or even bilateral affairs between different countries. So I think that can explain part of the chaos of what is happening. But I think that over time, we'll see more and more coherence to what they're trying to achieve as they settle on one approach.
Professor Yan, maybe you want to add to this, Professor Yan, and also answer the second question on how do you think the EU is being perceived from China and the US, specifically the EU's role in the emerging new, I don't want to call it an order, a new constellation.
Well, I think these two questions actually are connected with each other. And the reason is that the question also related to what you just said, whether Trump administration is forced to do so. If forced to do so, and then we believe no matter who is holding power there, they will do the same. Actually, we all know that when Biden is there just a few months before, and Biden definitely won't do the same thing. And related to, at least Biden won't adopt the same policy toward the EU like the Trump did. So what does it mean? It means that policy making and not only influenced by the international environment or the power structure, but also maybe mainly decided by leaders' type. That's my theory, moral realism. And the political leadership has different types. So this type decided by their strategic preference. That means prefer to solve the problems through a certain ways. So here you find that most people will use the term unilateralism to describe Trump's policy. He preferred to solve the problem by U.S. own capability. For Biden or the other American policymakers, they prefer to solve the problem by collective efforts of the U.S. with the U.S. allies. So we call it multilateralism, right? So my understanding, and I cannot know the process of the policy making in Trump's administration. I don't know what it is. I can not tell why they make policy in that. We can only tell the result. We find that his policy changed much faster, back and forth, very quick, have a less continuity. So in that way, come to the question about EU. I think what EU worried is not what Trump's today's policy. They worry about the Trump's policy may change too often. And if the Trump said, okay, now what I said, the policy will last 4 years, never change. And then EU will say, okay, this is your policy. Okay, we're concerned what we should do to deal. For instance, when Trump said, I will stop the arms aid to Ukraine. Okay, from now on, no more military aid. Then European states say, okay, let's reconsider this war. And there's absolutely no American aid to Ukraine. How can we do? But then a week later, Trump said, okay, I changed. I'm going to resume the arms aid to Ukraine. So the policymakers in the Europe say, hey, wait a minute. He turned back. So now we need a new policy to deal with it. The question is not to deal with a new policy. The question is that, hey, how about next week? If we change next week, what policy we should to make? So at this moment, from my understanding, the EU concerned his policy to U.S. is a certainty. No matter what the policy, good policy, bad policy, friend policy, enemy policy, they said, let me know what is your policy, which won't change. And then they said, we know what we should do. But if your policy change on the bike, then the policy maker in this continent said, we really don't know what policy we should adopt. At this moment, what the role the EU can play? That's also my understanding. Why EU reconsidering hedging strategy between China and the U.S.? Because they said, at least China's policy is consistent. We know that policy, no matter good or bad. So we know how to deal. We think about what's the right way to deal with the policy which won't change in the next 10 years. So now, my understanding, that's why very soon EU and China reached the agreement on principle of the free trade. At least China said, we do not change on this. We advance and advocating the free trade. That's it.
Yeah, the fluctuations in the Trump administration's policies have strategic effects. They put adversaries on their back heels, but of course they also get in the way of certain parts of the strategic agenda. So, for example, with shipbuilding, China currently has 300 times the shipbuilding capacity of the United States. 50% of shipbuilding in the world is in China. Then the other 40%. 40+% is in Japan and South Korea. So America has almost no shipbuilding capacity, and they're trying to fight a Pacific conflict with China. Now, so the Trump administration has declared that it wants shipbuilding capacity to move from Japan and South Korea to the United States. It's just that with when it comes to shipbuilding, if you build docks and you build factories in the United States, it's a process that takes years. And it's hard to get industrialists to invest in the United States if the policies change so quickly. So there's all kinds of interactions between the strategy and the pace at which decisions are being made by the Trump administration. We go to a question over here by the gentleman.
Me? Thank you very much. I am Sándor Kusai. I am an associate professor in the Pázmány Péter Catholic University, and I am a former ambassador for 6 years of Hungary in China. So I want to make two short comments and then a question. One comment, I fully agreed with the argumentation of Professor Yen, except the last part. If you think that humanity produces too much, please go to Bangladesh, Congo, or Peru, and you will see that there is a potential market, potential consumption for even more products and services than we can produce. That's one comment. The second comment is, I see that as in the last years, the Chinese way of thinking of the scholars still bears the big, deep illusions about Europe. Europe hasn't changed any of its attitude. Just yesterday, the European Commission put on a big fine on TikTok. Europe hasn't changed anything. Just 2 weeks ago, the European Commission demanded the severance of China-Russia cooperation. So nothing changed. Please, don't have illusions about Europe strategic autonomy. There is no such thing as that. Europe is an ally of the US, full stop. Sometimes it says some interesting things, but it does not do anything differently. And the question, since the mid-90s, the Chinese Communist Party's character went through a big change, thanks to the three representatives. Now the party represents the Chinese big companies, first and foremost, Huawei and the others. And we saw in history how a country which was governed by big business interests agreed with the US. We saw that in 1985. It's called the Plaza Accord. What is your opinion? Is this new negotiation, which begins tomorrow in Switzerland, is the preparation for a new Plaza Accord between China and the US? Thank you.
Okay, and I think the answer is very, very brief, that I don't think there's an agreement like a Plaza 1988 and the US reached with Japan, because Chinese policy is very clear, and if US want negotiation, and we must stand the equal foot, and US cannot talk to China from the superiority and the position that, okay, what US wants, China said, okay, we want the same, exactly the same like you. You must show the basic, the term is basic respect. We are see each other eye to eye, not from top to down or down, bottom up. So I think won't be a treaty like a plaza. And second, I want to say that I think that's absolutely right. Like the poor countries, many in Africa, in South Asia, these countries are still poor, and there's a potentiality for the world to develop their consumption capability. But even that today, these countries still have something for export. Why they export things is also because no matter minerals, sugars, cottons, anything, it means they don't have the capability to consume what they produced. I think this is the things will become worse and worse. The reason is very simple, because of AI. According to the theory, one person can use 16 AI and 3 robots simultaneously. What do I mean? It means one person master the apps and the robots can do 20 people's work simultaneously. Can you imagine that? Can we make the global productivity to balance with the demand globally without human beings' intervention? That's impossible. We need global efforts, collective cooperation to create that kind of balance between productivity and the demand. Otherwise, the AI has a very capable power to produce many, many things.
Yes, we have a question by Jean from our Danube Institute fellow.
Hello. Thank you, first of all of you. This has been a very fascinating discussion. My name is Sean Nodley. I am a visiting fellow here at the Danube Institute, and I've had the pleasure of meeting all of you. And thank you, Jan, for coming here to give us this very important perspective of what's going on in China and on these important issues. As you know, I worked on the Trump campaign and helped get him elected. So maybe you can blame me a little bit. I don't know. But you brought up some really fascinating points about the differing views of global orders. And you brought up this fascinating points of when it's been historically under a leadership, the order of being of leaders. I think that's sort of what President Trump has been pushing for, and if I remember correctly, in his first administration, 2016, 2017, he gave a speech to that effect at the United Nations, and the camera zoomed in to leader Xi Jinping, and he was nodding and applauding with him. Seems like he largely agreed with President Trump on what the sort of global order should look like. My question to you is, what do you think is the preferred global order today of China with its relationship, with the United States and the world? Is it the rules-based order that we're used to talking about, or is it this sort of the leadership making deals with each other order? And if it is that, is it better that the people own the state, or the state is owned by the leader?
Well, actually, theoretically speaking, both rules and deals between leaders are all instruments for establishing order. And I don't think there's when we're talking about establishing order, there's no difference. The difference is between these two mechanisms for global order is maintenance. Which mechanism can maintain the order durable? The order maintained by rules durable, or the order maintained by the deals between leaders durable? So the problem is not what kind of order we're going to produce. The question is that after we produce a new order, how can we maintain the durability of the order? So from my understanding, if we want to have a durable order, we have to rely on rules, because rules change slower. But if we want to have a quick change of order, people say, hey, we change the order from a backward order to progressive order, and we need leadership. Without leadership, we cannot change the get rid of the bad order to replace them with the advanced order, right? So you want to have the order based on the leadership that deals. So that really depends on what we want. My understanding at this moment, because a lot of people still talking about the globalization order, they're talking about how to maintain the order rather than to change the order. Why? They don't like the idea, order based on deals. But for Trump administration, my understanding, he said, no. Now is time not to maintain the order we already have. We need to create a new order. The rules are not very helpful to establish a new order. If we want to have a new order, we need deals between leaders. So that's the difference. And the other thing I really want to say, because today we use the term geopolitics, I think this word is used very often in both Europe and the US. Actually, the world has moved into digital age. Human beings, we are not only living in the geo-nature, we are living in both geospace and cyberspace. Geopolitics can apply to our life, competition, international relationship in the geospace, but not suitable for the relationship in the cyberspace. My understanding, human beings will spend more time, more life in cyberspace rather than in geospace. If you look at the college students, you ask them, how many hours they spend on the phone? How many hours, except sleep, how many hours they spend for the activity in the geospace? So actually, I think it's not take very long. Within 10 years, and the IR scholars will spend more time to study international relations in cyberspace rather than geospace. That's my personal view. I don't know. I'm 100% possible to be proved wrong.
May I just add to that the territorialization of the internet is a concept now going around in the scholarship and has been very strongly associated with the Great Firewall of China. So you're seeing a territorialization, so a sort of geo transformation of the internet, whereas previously cyberspace was seen as a space that would overcome borders completely.
Yeah, Eric, since you wanted to find something that we could disagree on,
yes.
I think this I would definitely disagree, because I think that the idea of the internet as this global space without borders, I think that was a product of the way of thinking of the period of hyperglobalization after the sort of neoliberal moment of the 1990s, and there was all this optimism. I think that for multiple reasons, the future, instead of being more in cyberspace than geopolitics, I think it will be the opposite. We're seeing the revenge of the real world, of geospace, onto the borderless idea, both in physical reality, the idea of globalization, and in the internet. And so what we're going to see, I think, as history returns, we're at the end of history, instead we will see the revenge of the real, I think, in general. And so we're seeing, this is why we need to reindustrialize, to have a capable defense industrial base. I think that's part of that this new awareness, even in Europe maybe, that if you're living in reality and not in the sort of false dream of utopian globalism that prevailed for a while, that you need to actually be based in reality and have physical defenses and physical capabilities. I think that AI may have many benefits to production, we'll see. Many people argue that. But you'll also find in Silicon Valley, a deep concern in the last few years by people like Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen, who say, for the last 20, 30 years in the United States, We've been obsessed with bits, with cyberspace, with producing technology, but that only meant digital technology. And what we really need is the world of atoms. And the United States may be, have a great GDP and be way ahead on paper or in cyberspace, but it's only ahead in cyberspace or on paper. And if you take out that financialization, you take out the value of Facebook or whatever, all the digital immaterial things. In material reality, the United States actually is not that far ahead of China, if not behind. And so, in fact, to have real comprehensive national power, what matters most is the atoms, not the bits. And so I think there's a new awareness as these people from that side of the Silicon Valley, the tech right, have come into the administration and joined forces with these people on trade. There's obviously disagreements, but I think one core idea of the Trump administration is that physical reality matters, and that's going to be the future. And we can't just keep thinking in terms of airy cyberspace and globalization and so on. I think those are connected.
So this is great for rounding up, because we have seen the erratic nature of the implementation of tariffs. But on the other side, we have seen some core ideas, and this is one of them on the side of the Trump administration. And we've seen structural logics at play in the transformation of our world. So, we have one question from Melissa O'Sullivan, who always has the right to insert a question.
Well, as a great Trump supporter, I would just like to say vis-a-vis tariffs, if tariffs are so bad, how come the rest of the world utilizes them against the U.S., whether it's our dairy products going into Canada, our automobiles going into Europe or Japan, etc.? And also in answer to the professor's question, the reason it might look a little erratic and messy is because within the administration, there's a battle between people like Howard Lutnick and Peter Navarro, who are very pro-tariffs, and then the people in the administration who are not, maybe exemplified by Bessent. I think he's for strategic use, but there's a battle. And in our system, we have a messy system, so that's why you might see some erratic swings. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. And I must say, it's so lovely that here in this room we have Americans, we have Chinese, we have Europeans. Of course, the Hungarians are well represented, and we may have some left-wing Americans secretly somewhere in the room, but we have a lot of Trump-supporting Americans, and we have a lot of Chinese people, including people from the Chinese embassy. And Professor Yen, of course. So I think maybe our world is falling apart, but things are not yet falling apart in this room. So with that, please give a round of applause to our two speakers.